Before I even get started, I just wanted to touch on what Samaya said. I mean, I've been an entrepreneur for a long time. Obviously, I am a white male, not the privileged class that is in that grouping. But I have raised money for 3 companies, probably 17. I've probably done 17 financing rounds, maybe a touch more actually in my career. And so I've talked to a lot of investors. The number of African American investors I have talked to, I think is under 4. The number of female investors that I've talked to is certainly less than 5%. And that's from, smaller venture capital firms up to pretty big growth firms. It's really been shocking. I'm really surprised. It's been certainly a lot needs to change in that industry, and it's going to take time because it's a process, but it's absolutely true. I've definitely seen it. Oh, that's pushing the up button. Not completely intuitive. Cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself very briefly, a little bit about my company, also pretty briefly, but enough to give you an idea of what we do. And then the suggestion that was made as far as the point of the presentation was talk a little bit about experiences. Like I said, I've been for a long time. So I'll touch on a couple of experiences that I've had that are hopefully useful, and then take questions. So there we go. All right. So I am a co-founder of MarginEdge, which I'll talk about in a second. I previously founded a company called Wasabi, a conveyor belt sushi restaurant chain. So opened a dozen restaurants around the country. So I have a lot of experience in the restaurant business. Before that, I started a higher ed tech company. So in the late 90s, I started a software company. Some of you may have heard of Blackboard. They actually acquired us. So it was a course management system for K-12 and higher ed. Just a couple of fun facts personally, Peace Corps and married for 20 years as of Tuesday. So that's exciting, and 3 wonderful children. So what is MarginEdge? MarginEdge is a back office software platform for restaurants. And so if you're not in the restaurant business, that probably means nothing whatsoever. But basically, when you're in a restaurant, you're dealing with an enormous amount of complexity. It's actually shocking. Like, people hear all the time that the restaurant business is difficult, but I think they don't really recognize just how difficult it is. So I started my first restaurant in 2005. I had a master's in finance and started and sold a technology company. So I was fairly sophisticated. I thought so, at least. I opened the first restaurant and realized just how tough it really is. So you've got variable revenue, variable food costs, variable labor costs. You're trying to schedule and buy food to hit a 10% margin on a top line that's moving. It's a tough business. And as you think about multiple restaurants opening, and the complexity of running multiple units, and all the issues that are involved, there's just a lot to it. So I spent 10 years doing that. Like I said, at a dozen restaurants around the country, and learned a lot about what those back office operations look like, and started a company to try and simplify that. So what MarginEdge does is we tie into point of sale systems. So we integrate with something like 60 point of sale systems that ingests all the sales data. We have an invoice capture app. So when you buy produce, cleaning supplies, anything in your restaurant, you take a picture of the invoice. We're up to about 400 people that are overseas that help us process those invoices. That data flows into the software. The sales data is tied into accounting systems. So that data flies out to your accounting system. But in the meantime, captures all of that so you can manage recipes, inventory, all that stuff. Holy moly, 6 minutes goes fast. All right, I'm gonna fly. So we're doing well. We're about 7 years in. We're just passing the 10 million ARR mark. So we're growing about 100% year on year, and we're up to about 150 people stateside, as I mentioned, about 400. Yeah, so I'm gonna go quick. So restaurant people, one of the main points that I want to get across is, if that's the worst curse word I use, one of the main things I want to get across as far as advice for people who are starting companies is product is king. Like, one of the biggest challenges that I see for a lot of people who start companies is that they're told they need an MVP, they need to get out, they need to generate revenue, and they need to show that they've got a business that can scale so they can raise capital. All of that is true, but the problem is many businesses get out with a point solution, with a small solution. They generate a little bit of revenue, and the people who are using the software and paying that little bit of revenue see a bigger vision, and so they're willing to pay something for it. But the founder will go out and raise money. The investors, if you bring in the wrong people, will be pointing to growth faster than the product is ready for. And so they'll race out and try to get a bunch of people to sign up for an early stage product that's not ready, that's not built to scale, that's not built to solve real problems. The early clients end up leaving because they're chasing new clients instead of taking care of them. And it's the nature of early stage venture capital. And so one of my first and primary points of advice would be to be careful about where you raise your early money. Bootstrap as long as you can. Get some developers together. Build something that you're really proud of, that you believe really will scale, before you go out and try to generate too much revenue or even raise money from the types of people that are going to be pointing to growth too early. It happens all the time. People raise a Series A and fall out, right? They get their $4 million or $10 million and they're super excited, but they don't get anywhere from that. The second thing is do what's right, not what's necessarily in the short term. And so, I won't read the slides to you, but a couple of big takeaways for me after 3 companies, 20-some years, is just be transparent. Just be honest. Like, be honest about the hard stuff. Be honest about the stuff you don't know. Be honest about the stuff you do know or you feel confident about. Like, build a team that likes being around each other. Like, one of the best pieces of advice I got along the years was like, if you're not laughing and having a good time in your meetings, you probably don't have the right team. Like, if it's tense and stressed, and look, you can go through really hard times. Like, the example I threw up here was COVID, right? So we were growing 100% year on year going into COVID. We had 1,000 restaurants. They were doing $1.2 billion in sales. COVID hit and the revenue dropped for those restaurants to 150 million. So overnight, we saw our industry collapse, right? And we were a high growth company, and so it was a brutal place to be. But being super transparent through that period and sharing pain, everyone in the company took a pay cut during COVID in our company. Our retention numbers were better than they were before that. And we ended up winning the Best Place to Work award the year that every single person in our company took a pay cut. Because we were open, we were honest, we were transparent, and everybody understood that this was not just us, it was a global issue. So one more quick point, and then I'll open up for questions. The other thing is, Samaya talked about entrepreneurship and how hard it is. And certainly for marginalized communities, it is harder than it is for someone like myself, I'm sure. But even for myself, as an entrepreneur for 20 years, I can tell you it's brutal. When you hit those really hard times, and I put up pictures of the 3 recessions that I run businesses through, when you hit those hard times, investors going from saying, oh, there's plenty of money, it's going to be great, blah, 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 to like a week later, wallets are shut, people are gone, you can't raise money, you're trying to figure out how to get through these hard times. Revenues go from growing quickly to shrinking, and it's just emotional. It's hard. You spend so much time and energy building these things. So one of my core pieces of advice for entrepreneurs is have a life outside of your business. Like, this whole follow your passion and that's all you should do all day, every day, and you should work 90 hours a week is insanity. Like, I just don't buy it. Like, have a life, have other things you enjoy, have things outside of the business, because the shit is going to hit the fan. Like, you may come through it perfectly well and look back on it and learned a lot, and that's great. But in the middle of it, you need some other things to be thinking about. So